She pretended to be the millionaire's girlfriend for one night, and he crossed every line. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have stayed this late, but she always did. The Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting silver shadows across the executive suite of Sterling and Associates. At 11:47 p.m., the building was a ghost town. Everyone had gone home hours ago to their families, their lives, their worlds beyond these walls. Everyone except Riley Thompson. At 29, Riley possessed the kind of beauty that commanded attention without demanding it. Her rich mahogany skin seemed to glow under the office's ambient lighting, and her natural curls were pulled back in a sleek bun that revealed the elegant curve of her neck. Tonight, she wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream silk blouse, professional, polished, and completely unaware of how the simple outfit hugged her curves in ways that made grown men forget their own names. But Riley Thompson didn't have time for such distractions. She was too busy being indispensable. "The Morrison deal needs the revised contracts by 8 a.m., she murmured to herself, fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. Her voice carried the warm, honeyed tones of someone who'd grown up in Georgia before New York had claimed her ambition. "The Tokyo presentation requires the updated financial projections, and you're still here." The voice cut through the silence like velvet over steel, deep, commanding, and tinged with something Riley couldn't quite place. Surprise? Concern. She'd worked for Adrian Sterling for 3 years, and she still couldn't read all his moods. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway of his corner office, and her breath caught just for a moment, the way it always did when she saw him unexpectedly. Adrian Sterling was 38 years old, and looked like he'd been carved from marble by an artist who believed in perfection. At 6'3", he filled doorways and commanded rooms without trying. His dark hair was slightly mussed now, as if he'd been running his hands through it, a rare crack in his usually impeccable armor. His steel blue eyes, the kind that could freeze a boardroom or melt a woman's resolve, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. He'd loosened his tie, a charcoal silk that probably cost more than most people's rent, and rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing forearms that spoke of early morning gym sessions and a discipline that extended to every aspect of his life. "Mr. Sterling." Riley straightened in her chair, suddenly hyper-aware of how intimate this moment felt, just the two of them, alone in this tower above the city. "I thought you'd left for the evening." "I tried." He stepped into her space, and she caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and uniquely him. "Then I realized I'd forgotten something. What can I get for you?" Adrian moved closer until he was standing beside her desk. This close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, evidence of the pressure he carried daily, could see the way his jaw tightened when he was wrestling with something difficult. "You work too hard, Riley." The unexpected gentleness in his voice made her heart skip. In 3 years he'd complimented her efficiency, her intelligence, her reliability. But this felt different, personal. "Someone has to keep you organized," she replied, managing a small smile. "You'd miss half your meetings without me." "I'd miss more than that." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Riley felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she quickly looked back at her computer screen. "The Hartley Investment Group wants to meet Thursday instead of Friday," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "I've already adjusted your calendar." Adrian didn't respond immediately. When she risked a glance up, she found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, vulnerable, almost uncertain. "Riley." His voice was quieter now, rougher. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about crossing lines?" The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Riley's fingers stilled on the keyboard, and she felt every nerve ending come alive. She knew exactly what he meant, had been thinking about those same lines for months, the invisible boundaries that kept their relationship strictly professional, even when every instinct screamed otherwise. "Mr. Sterling." "Adrian." He leaned against her desk, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "When it's just us, like this, call me Adrian." Adrian. His name felt dangerous on her tongue, intimate in a way that Mr. Sterling never had. "I think some lines exist for good reasons, and others exist to be crossed." The conviction in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. This was dangerous territory, the kind that could destroy careers, complicate lives, change everything between them forever. Riley Thompson was many things, Brilliant, dedicated, fiercely loyal, but weak wasn't one of them. She'd built her life on smart choices, careful boundaries, professional excellence. She wouldn't throw that away for... "I need to ask you something," Adrian said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But not here. Not like this." He moved toward the windows, putting distance between them and the glass walls that made their conversation visible to anyone passing by. Riley followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Riley," he began, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "There's something I need your help with. Something personal." "What kind of help?" she asked, though every instinct was screaming warnings. "Tomorrow night is the Westfield Charity Gala," he said, his steel blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "I can't go alone, not this time." Riley's world tilted on its axis. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand. I need you to be my date, Riley. Just for one evening." His voice was rough with something she'd never heard before. Vulnerability, desperation, hope. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend." The request hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and completely unexpected. Riley stared at him, seeing not the powerful CEO, but a man who was asking for help in the most vulnerable way possible. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. Adrian moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Because you're the only woman I trust. And tomorrow night, I need to trust someone more than I need to breathe." Riley closed her eyes, every rational thought in her head screaming warnings. This was her boss, her very attractive, powerful, dangerously compelling boss, who was asking her to cross the one line she'd sworn she never would. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "Riley." His hand touched her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "Say yes." And in that moment, staring into those steel blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for longer than she cared to admit, Riley Thompson felt every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her feelings begin to crumble. But before she could answer, before she could seal both their fates with a single word, the elevator chimed in the distance. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor of the lobby, growing closer. Adrian stepped back, the spell broken, his professional mask snapping back into place with practiced ease. But she could see the storm still raging behind his eyes, the vulnerability he was fighting to hide. "Think about it," he said, his voice carefully neutral as the footsteps approached their floor. "I know I'm asking a lot. Take the weekend. I'll need an answer by Monday morning." "Adrian, please," he interrupted softly. "Just think about it." The elevator doors opened, and the night security guard stepped onto their floor, flashlight in hand, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just interrupted a moment that could change everything. "Evening, Mr. Sterling, Ms. Thompson. Working late again?" "Just finishing up, George," Adrian replied smoothly, but his eyes never left Riley's face. "See you both Monday." As he disappeared into his office, closing the door behind him, Riley stared at her reflection in the darkened window. This weekend, she would have to make the most important decision of her professional life. Maybe her personal life, too. She would spend the weekend thinking about Adrian Sterling's impossible request, and somehow she already knew what her answer would be. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Adrian's personal number. "I know I'm asking the impossible, but I had to ask. Thank you for considering it." Riley smiled despite herself, her heart pounding against her ribs as she realized she was about to discover just how dangerous it could be when dreams and reality collided. Monday couldn't come fast enough, and that was exactly what scared her most. Monday morning came with a weight of anticipation that made Riley's coffee taste like anxiety. She stood in her apartment bathroom at 6:15 a.m., staring at her reflection, while her mind replayed every moment of Friday night's conversation with Adrian. Her Brooklyn Heights loft had been her sanctuary all weekend. Exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and furniture that spoke of a woman who'd worked hard for everything she owned. But even here, she couldn't escape the memory of Adrian's voice, rough with vulnerability, asking her to cross every professional line they'd ever drawn. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend." She'd spent the entire weekend thinking about it. Saturday morning runs along the promenade, Sunday brunch with Kayla deflecting questions about why she seemed so distracted, Sunday evening staring at her phone, typing and deleting responses to Adrian's text. Now it was Monday, and she had to give him an answer. Her phone buzzed against the counter, a message from Adrian that made her pulse spike. "Good morning." I hope you had a good weekend. No pressure, but if you've made a decision about Friday night. Riley stared at the message, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. 3 days of thinking, 3 days of weighing consequences, 3 days of admitting to herself what she'd been trying to deny for months. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she typed back, "Yes," one word that changed everything. The response came immediately. "Are you certain?" Riley closed her eyes, remembering the vulnerability in his voice when he'd asked for her help. "I'm certain." "When is the gala?" "Friday night. My driver will pick you up at 2 p.m. on Friday for shopping. Bergdorf's, 5th floor. Ask for Sophia." 3 simple words that somehow contained a universe of possibility. Riley closed her eyes, remembering the vulnerability in his voice when he'd asked for her help. Adrian Sterling didn't ask for help, from anyone, ever. The fact that he'd trusted her with this. "See you at the office," she replied. "Riley," she waited, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear several times before his next message arrived. "Thank you. I know I'm asking a lot." "You're worth it," she typed before she could think better of it. The silence that followed felt deafening. Riley immediately wanted to take it back, to explain that she meant professionally, that she was just being a good assistant, that, "So are you." 2 words that made her knees weak and her coffee taste like liquid confidence. The Sterling & Associates offices felt different that morning, charged with an electricity that made Riley's skin hum. She arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, as always, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt nervous walking through those familiar halls. Adrian's office door was already open, and she could hear him on a conference call, something about international markets and quarterly projections. His voice was crisp, professional, completely in control. No trace of the man who'd touched her cheek in the darkness and asked her to cross every line they'd ever drawn. "The Tokyo numbers are stronger than projected," she heard him say as she settled at her desk. "Push the meeting to next week. I want those margins bulletproof before we present." Riley powered up her computer and tried to focus on the morning's tasks, but her attention kept drifting to the man in the corner office. Through the glass walls, she could see him pacing as he talked, one hand gesturing as he made his point. God, he was beautiful. Not just handsome, beautiful in the way that classical sculptures were beautiful, all sharp angles and controlled power contained in perfectly tailored suits that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Riley!" She jumped, heat flooding her cheeks as she realized he'd finished his call and caught her staring. Adrian stood in his doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking at her with something that might have been amusement. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." The formal address felt strange now, like a costume that no longer fit properly. "Could I see you for a moment?" Her legs felt unsteady as she walked into his office. Adrian closed the door behind her, something he'd never done before, and she found herself hyper-aware of how small the space suddenly felt. "About last night," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." Riley lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not a child, Adrian. I know what I said yes to." Something flashed in his eyes at her use of his first name. "Do you? You need a date for a charity gala. Someone you trust not to embarrass you or sell stories to the tabloids. Someone who can play the part convincingly." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I can do that. It's not that simple." Adrian moved closer until she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "There will be photographers, society reporters, people who know me well enough to spot a fake. Then we'd better not look fake." The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to face. Adrian's jaw tightened, and Riley could see him wrestling with something. "The press will dig into your background," he continued, his voice rougher now. "They'll want to know who you are, where you came from. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Riley straightened her shoulders. "I have nothing to hide. I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in business administration. I've worked for some of the most powerful people in New York. I can hold my own in any room, at any table, with anyone. I know that." Adrian's voice was soft now, almost tender. "I've watched you do it for 3 years. Actually, that brings up something I need to discuss with you." Riley's heart skipped. "What?" "I've been meaning to talk to you about a promotion. Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Your own office, your own team." Adrian moved closer, and she could see something like pride in his expression. "I spoke with HR and the board 3 months ago. They're unanimous. You're ready." Riley felt her breath catch. 3 months ago? Before any of this, Adrian said firmly, before I even admitted to myself how I felt about you, the promotion is yours because you've earned it, Riley, not because of anything happening between us. What? He was quiet for so long that Riley wondered if he'd changed his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My ex-wife will be there. The words hit her like a physical blow. Riley knew Adrian had been married. It was public record, splashed across business journals when the divorce was finalized 2 years ago, but he'd never spoken about it, never given any indication that it still affected him. I see. She kept her voice carefully neutral. And she's the reason you can't go alone. Adrian's laugh was bitter. Isabel has a talent for making scenes. The last time we were at the same event, she made sure every photographer in the room captured her, expressing her opinions about my character. Riley could imagine it, some perfectly polished socialite wielding humiliation like a weapon, using her connection to Adrian to wound him in the most public way possible. What did she say? That I was incapable of real intimacy, that I used people and discarded them when they were no longer useful, that I would die alone because I'd never learned how to actually love someone. The pain in his voice made Riley's chest tight. She could see why those words would haunt him, not because they were necessarily true, but because, coming from someone who'd shared his bed, his life, they would feel like verdicts rather than opinions. You want her to see you with someone new, Riley said quietly. Someone who clearly doesn't see you that way. I want her to see that she was wrong. Adrian's eyes met hers, and Riley saw something raw and honest there. I want her to see that someone brilliant and beautiful chooses to be with me, not for my money or my connections, but because I'm worth choosing. The vulnerability in his admission broke something open in Riley's chest. This wasn't about revenge or public relations. This was about a man who'd been told he was fundamentally unlovable, trying to prove otherwise. Adrian. She reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on the desk. You are worth choosing. Anyone who can't see that is blind. His fingers turned under hers, palm to palm, and suddenly the air in the room felt thin. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could count the individual lashes that framed them. Riley. His free hand lifted toward her face, and she felt herself leaning into the touch before she remembered where they were. A sharp knock on the door made them spring apart. Adrian cleared his throat, straightening his tie, as Riley smoothed her skirt with hands that weren't quite steady. Come in, Adrian called, his voice impressively controlled. James Fletcher, Adrian's business partner, poked his head through the door. Sorry to interrupt, but the Singapore team is on line 2. They need an answer about the Henderson acquisition. Of course, put them through. Adrian was already moving toward his desk, the moment broken. Riley, we'll continue this discussion later. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and headed for the door on legs that felt like water. Oh, and Riley! Adrian's voice stopped her at the threshold. When she turned, his eyes held a heat that made her stomach flip. Wear something red tonight. You look incredible in red. James Fletcher's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline, but Riley barely noticed. All she could focus on was the way Adrian was looking at her, like she was already his, like the pretending had already begun. I'll keep that in mind, she managed, then escaped to her desk before she did something that would scandalize the entire office. As she settled back into her chair, Riley caught her reflection in her computer screen. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like excitement. Tonight she would put on a red dress and become Adrian Sterling's girlfriend. She would let him touch her, look at her, claim her in front of hundreds of people. And somewhere between the champagne and the cameras, the pretending and the performance, Riley had the terrifying suspicion that the line between fake and real was about to disappear entirely. Her phone buzzed with a text. Red like sin. I can't wait to see you on Friday. Riley stared at the message, her heart hammering against her ribs. Friday night couldn't come fast enough, and that was exactly what scared her most. Friday afternoon arrived with a mixture of excitement and terror. Riley stood in the opulent dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her from every angle, watching a woman she barely recognized stare back at her. The week had passed in a blur of anticipation and second-guessing, but now, in this moment, everything felt real. The sales associate, Sophia, an elegant woman in her 50s with silver hair and knowing eyes, circled her like an artist examining her masterpiece. Mr. Sterling has exquisite taste, Sophia murmured, adjusting the drape of deep crimson silk across Riley's shoulders. Though I suspect this choice was more about you than the dress, The gown was stunning, a floor-length creation that hugged every curve before flowing like liquid fire around her legs. The neckline was daring without being scandalous, the back cut low enough to make a man forget his own name. But it was the way the color seemed to make her skin glow, the way it turned her brown eyes molten gold, that took Riley's breath away. He specifically requested red, Riley said, running her hands over the silk. The fabric felt like warm water against her skin. Sophia's smile was mysterious. Men who request specific colors for their women usually have very particular fantasies in mind. Heat flooded Riley's cheeks. It's not like that. Of course not, darling. Sophia's tone was perfectly neutral, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Shall we talk about shoes? An hour later, Riley emerged from the store carrying more shopping bags than she'd accumulated in the past year. The shoes alone, strappy Louboutin heels that made her legs look like they went on for miles, cost more than her monthly rent. But Adrian had insisted, his assistant calling ahead with explicit instructions that money was no object. The thought of him choosing every detail, imagining her in these clothes, made something flutter dangerously in her chest. Riley's phone buzzed as she settled into the back of Adrian's car, a sleek black sedan with leather seats that probably cost more than most people's cars. How did the shopping go? Adrian's text read. Riley found herself smiling as she typed back, "You'll have to wait and see. I'm not a patient man, Riley." The response came so quickly that she could almost hear his voice saying the words, deep, rough, tinged with something that made her stomach tighten with anticipation. "Good things come to those who wait," she replied. "Are you a good thing, Riley Thompson?" The question hung on her phone screen like a challenge. Riley stared at it, her heart doing something acrobatic in her chest. This was dangerous territory, the space between professional and personal, between pretending and feeling. "Ask me tonight," she typed before she could lose her nerve. "I intend to." Riley's apartment felt different when she returned, charged with possibility and nervous energy. She had 4 hours before Adrian's driver would pick her up. 4 hours to transform herself from competent assistant to convincing girlfriend. The week since Monday had been a careful dance of professionalism and stolen glances. Adrian had maintained perfect boundaries at work. No lingering touches, no heated looks across conference rooms, but Riley had caught him watching her sometime, and the intensity in his gaze reminded her that Friday night was coming whether she felt ready or not. She started with a bath, sinking into water perfumed with jasmine oil, trying to quiet the butterflies that seemed to have taken permanent residence in her stomach. This was just one night, one performance. She could do this, but as she lay in the warm water, her mind kept drifting to the morning, the way Adrian had looked at her when she'd covered his hand with hers, the vulnerability in his voice when he'd talked about his ex-wife, the heat in his eyes when he'd told her to wear red. Red like sin. Riley closed her eyes, remembering the way those words had made her feel. Desired, dangerous, completely unlike the careful, controlled woman she'd worked so hard to become. Her phone rang from the bedroom, and she reluctantly climbed out of the bath, wrapping herself in a plush robe before padding across the hardwood floors to answer. "Riley?" Her best friend Kayla's voice came through the speaker, bright with curiosity. "Please tell me you have plans tonight that involve more than Netflix and Thai food." Riley hesitated. She and Kayla had been friends since college, had shared everything from bad boyfriends to career triumphs. But this, how did she explain this? "Actually, I have a work event," Riley said, which was technically true. "Ooh, fancy work event? Please tell me you're finally going to make a move on that gorgeous boss of yours." Riley nearly dropped the phone. "Kayla, what? I've seen the way you look when you talk about Adrian Sterling, like you want to climb him like a tree and never come down. That's completely inappropriate. He's my boss. He's also single, successful, and according to Forbes, one of the most eligible bachelors in New York." Kayla's voice turned serious. "Honey, you've been working yourself to death for 3 years. When's the last time you let yourself want something just because it felt good?" Riley sank onto her bed, staring at the red dress hanging in her closet. "It's complicated. The best things usually are. Just promise me you'll consider the possibility that maybe some complications are worth it." After they hung up, Riley sat in the gathering dusk, Kayla's words echoing in her mind. When was the last time she'd let herself want something just because it felt good? The answer was never. Riley Thompson had built her life on smart choices, careful planning, avoiding complications that could derail her carefully constructed future. But tonight, she was going to pretend to be in love with Adrian Sterling. And the most terrifying part wasn't that she had to convince everyone else. It was that she was already halfway to convincing herself. At exactly 6:30 p.m., Riley stood in front of her full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The red dress fit like it had been made for her, hugging her curves and flowing around her legs like liquid silk. She'd left her hair down in loose waves that caught the light as she moved, and her makeup was sultry but elegant. Smoky eyes that made her look mysterious, lips the color of dark wine, the diamonds Adrian had sent, a delicate necklace and matching earrings that probably cost more than her car, caught the light every time she breathed. She looked like a woman who belonged at Adrian Sterling's side. More than that, she looked like a woman who could make him forget every other woman who'd ever walked away. Her phone buzzed. "The car is downstairs. Are you ready?" Riley took one last look in the mirror, smoothing her hands over the silk dress. She thought about Kayla's words, about complications that were worth it, about the way Adrian had looked at her that morning, like she was the answer to questions he'd been afraid to ask. "As ready as I'll ever be," she typed back. "Riley." She waited, watching the dots appear and disappear several times. "You're going to be incredible tonight. Thank you for doing this." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "You haven't seen me trip down the stairs in these heels. I'd catch you." 3 simple words that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously like affection. Riley stared at the message, her reflection wavering in the mirror through suddenly blurry eyes. This was supposed to be pretend. One night of playing a role, helping a friend, maintaining professional boundaries while exploring the edges of something that could never be real. But as she grabbed her clutch and headed for the door, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something that would change everything, not just for tonight, but forever. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending into a dream. Through the glass doors, she could see Adrian's car waiting, could see him standing beside it in a tuxedo that made her heart skip several beats. When the doors opened and she stepped outside, the look on Adrian Sterling's face made every complicated feeling, every nervous butterfly, every moment of doubt completely worth it. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, like she was already his. And for the first time in her carefully controlled life, Riley Thompson didn't want to run from that look. She wanted to walk straight into it and see what happened when pretending became something real. "Hello, Adrian," she said softly as she approached him. "Hello, beautiful." His voice was rough with something that sounded nothing like pretense. "Ready to change everything?" Riley took his offered arm, felt the strength of him through the expensive fabric of his jacket, and smiled. "Let's go break some hearts." As they drove toward the glittering lights of Manhattan, Riley caught Adrian watching her in the reflection of the window, his eyes dark with something that made her blood sing. Tonight was supposed to be about helping him prove something to his ex-wife. But as the city lights blurred past and Adrian's hand found hers in the darkness between them, Riley realized tonight might end up proving something else entirely. Something that scared her more than any pretense ever could. The Waldorf Astoria glittered like a jewel against the Manhattan night sky. Riley felt Adrian's hand tighten on hers as their car pulled up to the red carpet entrance, where photographers waited like hungry wolves, and society's elite stepped from limousines in clouds of perfume and ambition. Through the tinted windows, she could see the flash of cameras, the elegant chaos of New York's most exclusive charity gala. "Second thoughts?" Adrian's voice was low, intimate in the darkness of the back seat. Riley turned to look at him, and her breath caught all over again. The tuxedo transformed him from devastatingly handsome to absolutely lethal, every line perfectly tailored to emphasize the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength of his frame. His dark hair was styled with casual perfection, and those steel blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget they were supposed to be pretending. "Are you having second thoughts?" she countered, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Adrian's free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "Looking at you right now? Not a single one." The raw honesty in his voice sent heat spiraling through her. This close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, could smell his cologne mixing with something uniquely him, could feel the barely restrained tension in the way he held himself, like he was fighting not to kiss her right there in the back of his car. "Adrian," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. "I know." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I feel it too." Before she could ask what it was, the car door opened and cool night air rushed in, along with the sounds of the city and the distant pop of camera flashes. Adrian stepped out first, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease before turning to offer her his hand. Riley took it, letting him help her from the car, and heard the sudden increase in camera activity as photographers realized who had arrived. "Adrian Sterling," someone called out. "Who's the stunning woman with you tonight?" Riley felt Adrian's arms slide around her waist, pulling her against his side with a possessiveness that felt startlingly real. His hand settled on the curve of her hip, and she could feel the heat of his palm through the silk of her dress. "Gentlemen," Adrian said smoothly, his voice carrying that note of controlled authority that made boardrooms go silent. "I'd like you to meet Riley Thompson." He said her name like it meant something, like she was someone worth knowing. Riley felt herself straightening under the weight of his pride, drawing strength from the solid warmth of him beside her. The cameras flashed as they walked the red carpet, Adrian's hand never leaving her waist. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple completely absorbed in each other. The way Adrian leaned down to whisper in her ear, the way Riley's laugh sounded soft and intimate, the way they moved together like they'd been doing this dance for years. "You're a natural at this," Adrian murmured as they posed for another round of photos. "So are you." Riley tilted her head up to look at him, and the expression on his face made her pulse stutter. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the world, like the cameras and crowds had completely disappeared. "That's because I'm not acting," he said quietly. The words meant only for her. Before Riley could process what that meant, a voice cut through the elegant chaos around them. "Adrian, darling, how wonderful to see you." Riley felt Adrian's entire body go rigid beside her, his hand tightening protectively on her waist. She turned to see a woman approaching them, tall, blonde, perfectly polished, in the way that spoke of old money and newer surgeries. Everything about her was calculated for maximum impact, from her ice blue gown to the diamonds that caught every flash of light. This had to be Isabel. "Hello, Isabel." Adrian's voice was perfectly controlled, but Riley could feel the tension radiating from him. Isabel's eyes swept over Riley with the kind of assessment that would have made a lesser woman wilt. But Riley Thompson hadn't built her career by wilting under pressure. She straightened her shoulders and met the other woman's gaze directly. "And you must be Adrian's assistant." Isabel's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Actually," Adrian said before Riley could respond, his arm tightening around her, "this is Riley Thompson, my girlfriend." The word girlfriend rolled off his tongue like he'd been saying it for years, like it belonged there. "How lovely." Isabel's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "I don't believe we've met, Riley. How long have you two been together?" It was a trap, obviously. Ask the right questions, poke at the details, expose the cracks in their story. Riley could feel the weight of Adrian's attention, could sense him waiting to see how she'd handle this first real test. "Long enough to know that I'm exactly where I belong," Riley said smoothly, letting her hand rest on Adrian's chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, steady and strong. "Though I have to say, Adrian's been keeping me all to himself. Very selfish of him." She looked up at Adrian with what she hoped looked like fond exasperation, and the smile he gave her in return made her knees weak. There was something in his eyes. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper. Something that looked dangerously like pride. "Guilty as charged," he said, bringing her hand to his lips to press a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Can you blame me for wanting to keep something this precious to myself?" The gesture was simple, intimate, completely believable, and the way his lips lingered against her skin, the way his eyes held hers over their joined hands, made Riley forget for a moment that they were performing for an audience. How romantic. Isabel's voice was honey over broken glass. "Well, I should let you two lovebirds get back to your evening. Adrian, do try to have fun. You always were so serious about everything." She drifted away into the crowd, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and thinly veiled hostility. "Well," Riley said quietly, "that was fun." Adrian's laugh was genuine, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "You were incredible. The way you handled her. I've never seen anyone shut Isabel down that effectively. She's exactly what I expected." Riley smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his lapel, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "Beautiful, polished and mean as a snake." "And you," Adrian said, his voice dropping to that rough register that made her stomach flutter, "are everything she's not." Before Riley could ask what he meant by that, the crowd around them began moving toward the ballroom entrance. Adrian offered her his arm with old-fashioned gallantry, and they joined the elegant procession. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors, and hundreds of perfectly dressed people mingled beneath soaring ceilings, painted with cherubs and gold leaf. It was the kind of opulence that belonged in fairy tales, and for a moment, Riley felt like Cinderella stepping into the ball. "Champagne?" Adrian asked, already signaling a passing waiter. "Please." Riley accepted the flute of golden liquid, hyper-aware of how Adrian's fingers brushed hers during the exchange. "This place is incredible." "It is." But Adrian wasn't looking at the ballroom. He was looking at her, and the expression on his face made her feel like she was the most magnificent thing in the room. "Dance with me?" It wasn't really a question. Adrian was already setting down his champagne, already extending his hand toward her. And Riley, caught in the spell of the moment, could only nod. The orchestra was playing something slow and romantic as Adrian led her onto the dance floor. His hand settled on her waist, fingers spanning the small of her back, while his other hand captured hers. They moved together like they'd been dancing for years, like their bodies had been designed to fit together exactly this way. "You realize everyone's watching us," Riley murmured, as Adrian spun her gently, the red silk of her dress flowing around her legs. "Let them watch." Adrian pulled her closer, until there was barely an inch of space between them. "Let them see exactly what they're missing." His breath was warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could feel the solid strength of his chest against hers with every breath. "Adrian," she started, not sure what she wanted to say. "I know," he said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on her back through the silk. "I feel it too. This thing between us. It's not just for show, is it?" Riley's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the point where they could acknowledge what was happening between them, or pretend it was all just excellent acting. "No," she whispered, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "It's not just for show." Adrian's eyes went dark, and for a moment Riley thought he might kiss her right there on the dance floor, in front of hundreds of people and a dozen cameras. Instead, he spun her again, dipping her low enough that her hair brushed the floor, and her entire world narrowed to the strength of his arms and the heat in his eyes. When he pulled her upright, they were both breathing hard, and Riley could see her own desire reflected in his face. "We should probably mingle," Adrian said, his voice rougher than usual. "Probably," Riley agreed, making no move to step out of his arms. They stayed like that for another heartbeat, suspended in a moment that felt infinite and fragile at the same time. Then someone tapped Adrian on the shoulder, and the spell was broken. "Sterling, there you are." Riley recognized James Fletcher, Adrian's business partner, approaching with a couple she didn't know. Adrian's arm stayed around her waist as they made introductions, and Riley found herself falling into the role of devoted girlfriend with surprising ease. But as the evening progressed, as they moved from conversation to conversation, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted on that dance floor. This wasn't pretense anymore. This was something real, something dangerous, something that could change both their lives forever. And as Adrian's hand found the small of her back for the dozenth time that evening, as his fingers traced patterns on her skin through the silk, Riley realized she was no longer afraid of that change. She was ready for it. The evening had become a beautiful blur of champagne and stolen glances. Riley found herself tucked into Adrian's side, on a velvet settee in one of the ballroom's intimate alcoves, watching the glittering crowd through a haze of something that felt dangerously like happiness. They'd been at the gala for 2 hours, and she'd lost count of how many people had complimented them as a couple, how many knowing smiles had been directed their way. "You're thinking too hard," Adrian murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. His arm was draped casually around her shoulders, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare arm. "Am I?" Riley turned to look at him, struck again by how devastating he looked in formal wear. The tuxedo made his shoulders seem broader, his eyes more intense. "What makes you say that?" "That little line right here." His finger touched the space between her eyebrows with gentle precision. "You get it when you're processing something complicated." The fact that he'd noticed such a small detail, that he'd been watching her closely enough to catalogue her expressions, made Riley's chest tight with something she wasn't ready to name. "How long have you been studying me, Mr. Sterling?" "Longer than I should have." His honesty was devastating. Longer than was appropriate for a boss to study his assistant. Before Riley could respond, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. Adrian accepted 2 flutes, handing one to Riley with a smile that made her forget her own name. "2 excellent performances," he said, raising his glass. "To crossing lines," Riley countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Something flashed in Adrian's eyes, heat, hunger, and something that looked like relief. "To crossing lines," he agreed, touching his glass to hers. The champagne was perfect, crisp and golden, with bubbles that danced on Riley's tongue. But it was the way Adrian watched her drink, the way his gaze lingered on her lips that made her feel truly intoxicated. "Adrian Sterling, you magnificent bastard!" They both turned to see a man in his 60s approaching, silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of confidence that came from old money and older connections. "Harrison?" Adrian stood, extending his hand. "Good to see you." Harrison Whitfield. Riley recognized him now from business journals and society pages, old New York royalty, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a word in the right ear. "And this must be the mystery woman everyone's talking about." Harrison's eyes twinkled as he looked at Riley. "My dear, you've caused quite a stir tonight. Half the women here are plotting to steal your dress, and the other half are trying to figure out how you managed to tame the untamable Adrian Sterling." Riley felt Adrian's hand find the small of her back, a possessive gesture that sent heat spiraling through her. "I hardly think Adrian needed taming," she said with a smile. "More like gentle encouragement to let his guard down." "Gentle encouragement?" Adrian's voice was amused. "Is that what we're calling it?" The private joke in his tone, the intimacy of it, made Riley's pulse skip. To anyone watching, they looked like lovers sharing a secret moment. "Well, whatever you did, it's working." Harrison clapped Adrian on the shoulder. "I haven't seen you this relaxed in years. Hold on to this one, son. Women like her don't come along often." After Harrison moved on, Riley found herself studying Adrian's profile in the low light. "Do I really make you more relaxed?" "You make me a lot of things, Riley Thompson." Adrian's voice was rough with something that sounded nothing like pretense. "Relaxed is just one of them. What are the others?" Adrian turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Crazy, desperate, completely out of control. The words hung between them like a confession. Riley felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the air between them grow thick with possibility. "Adrian, I know we said this was just for tonight," he continued, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, "but I can't keep pretending that touching you doesn't set me on fire, that looking at you doesn't make me forget every rule I've ever made about keeping business and pleasure separate." Riley leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. When she opened them, Adrian was watching her with an expression that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Isabel was right about one thing. I have been alone. I've been alone because I never found anyone worth the risk." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "Until you." Before Riley could respond, the orchestra began playing a new song, something slow and haunting that seemed to pull couples onto the dance floor like a siren's call. "Dance with me again," Adrian said, standing and offering his hand. This time, when they moved together, it felt different, more intimate, more real. Adrian pulled her closer than propriety dictated, until she could feel the solid warmth of his chest against hers, until she could count his heartbeats. "Everyone's still watching us," Riley murmured, hyper-aware of the cameras that had been following them all evening. "Let them watch." Adrian's hand slid lower on her back, fingers splaying possessively. "Let them see exactly how gone I am for you." The raw honesty in his voice made Riley's knees weak. This wasn't performance anymore. This was Adrian Sterling, successful businessman and confirmed bachelor, telling her in front of hundreds of people that she'd gotten under his skin. "You can't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because," Riley struggled to find words for the chaos in her chest, "because I might start believing them." "Good." Adrian spun her slowly, pulling her back against his chest so that his lips were at her ear. "Because I need you to believe them. I need you to believe that this is real." Riley's eyes drifted closed as his words washed over her. The music, the movement, the solid strength of him holding her, it all felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. When the song ended, they stayed locked together for a moment longer than necessary. Riley could feel Adrian's heart racing against her palm, could see the struggle in his eyes as he fought between what was proper and what he wanted. "We should," she started. "Should what?" His voice was rough, desperate. "Get some air?" The suggestion hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to voice, but Adrian nodded, his hand finding hers as he led her toward the ballroom's French doors that opened onto a moonlit terrace. The cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the crowded ballroom. The terrace overlooked Central Park, the city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. It was beautiful, romantic, and completely private. Riley. Adrian turned to face her, and in the moonlight he looked like something from a fairy tale. Perfectly handsome, slightly dangerous, and completely focused on her. I need you to know something. What? This isn't just about Isabel anymore. It stopped being about her the moment you walked out of your apartment tonight looking like every dream I didn't know I had. Riley's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Adrian, I know it's complicated. I know I'm your boss and this could change everything between us, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't want you, that I haven't wanted you for longer than I care to admit. Riley stared at him, seeing not the controlled businessman she worked for, but a man who was laying his heart on the line, vulnerable, honest, completely at her mercy. How long? She whispered. Do you remember last Christmas, the office party? Riley nodded, remembering the way he'd looked at her across the crowded conference room, the way her pulse had jumped when he'd wished her happy holidays. You wore a green dress. Nothing fancy, just simple and elegant and perfect. And when you laughed at something James said, I realized I wanted to be the one making you laugh like that. I wanted to be the one you looked at like I was worth your attention. The confession hit her like a physical blow. All those months of careful professionalism, of maintained boundaries, and he'd been feeling this too. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was terrified. Adrian's laugh was self-deprecating. Adrian Sterling, afraid of a 5'7" woman with the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. Riley stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. I'm not that scary. You're terrifying. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You could destroy me, Riley Thompson. Completely, utterly destroy me. I would never... I know. His forehead touched hers, and they stood there breathing the same air, suspended in a moment that felt infinite. That's what makes you so dangerous. You have all this power over me, and you don't even realize it. Riley's hands found his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart under the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. Adrian, tell me I'm not alone in this, he whispered against her lips. Tell me you feel this too. Riley's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the point where they could acknowledge what was happening between them, or pretend it was all just excellent acting. You're not alone, she breathed, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. I feel it too. This thing between us, it's terrifying. Adrian's eyes went dark with something that looked like relief and hunger combined. Terrifying, he agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip. But real. And then Adrian Sterling, controlled businessman and confirmed bachelor, completely lost control. He kissed her, not the gentle, careful kiss of a man testing waters, but the desperate, hungry kiss of a man who'd been starving and finally found sustenance. His lips were warm and firm, and tasted like champagne and promises, and Riley felt her entire world shift on its axis. She kissed him back with 3 years of suppressed feelings, with every moment of wanting him from across conference rooms and through glass office walls, her hands fisted in his lapels, pulling him closer, needing more of him, all of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. That was... he started. Yeah, Riley agreed, not needing him to finish. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, both knowing that everything had just changed irrevocably. What happens now? Riley whispered. Adrian's smile was soft, real, completely unguarded. Now we stop pretending this is just for one night. Time seemed to move differently after that kiss. Riley felt like she was floating through the rest of the evening, hyper-aware of every touch, every glance, every moment, when Adrian's hand found the small of her back or his fingers brushed against hers. The pretense was gone now, replaced by something raw and electric that hummed between them like a live wire. They made their way back into the ballroom, and Riley caught their reflection in one of the massive mirrors lining the walls. They looked different now. Adrian's eyes held a heat that hadn't been there before, and something in her own face had softened, opened. Anyone looking at them could see exactly what had happened on that moonlit terrace. Mr. Sterling, a photographer approached with the eager smile of someone who sensed a good story. Could we get a few more shots of you and your lovely date? Of course. Adrian's arm slid around Riley's waist, pulling her against his side with a possessiveness that felt startlingly natural. As they posed for the cameras, Riley became acutely aware of how Adrian's thumb traced small circles on her hip, how he leaned into her just slightly, how his entire body seemed attuned to hers. This wasn't the careful performance from earlier in the evening. This was a man who couldn't keep his hands off the woman he wanted. Beautiful, the photographer murmured, snapping away. You can really feel the chemistry between you two. Riley felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Adrian just smiled, his free hand coming up to touch her face with devastating gentleness. She makes it easy, he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made Riley's heart do something acrobatic in her chest. After the photographer moved on, they found themselves alone again in the elegant chaos of the gala. The orchestra was playing something soft and romantic. Couples swayed on the dance floor, and the air was thick with perfume and possibility. "Regrets?" Adrian asked quietly, his voice pitched only for her ears. Riley looked up at him, this man who'd just turned her carefully ordered world upside down with a single kiss, and felt something settle into place in her chest, something that felt like coming home. "Not a single one," she said, and watched relief flood his features. "Good." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with an intimacy that felt both new and ancient. "Because I have plans for us, Riley Thompson." "What kind of plans?" Adrian's smile was slow, devastating, full of promise. "The kind that start with getting you out of this dress." Heat shot through Riley's body like lightning. The way he was looking at her, like he wanted to devour her whole, made her forget they were standing in a room full of people. "Adrian," she breathed, not sure if she was protesting or encouraging. "Too much." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and even that simple touch made her pulse race. "Not nearly enough," she admitted, surprised by her own boldness. Something dark and hungry flashed in Adrian's eyes. "Dangerous words, sweetheart." Before Riley could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught their attention. Someone had arrived late, someone who was causing quite a stir among the photographers and society reporters. "Oh, wonderful," Adrian muttered under his breath. "Just what this evening needed." Riley followed his gaze and saw a man in his 50s making his way through the crowd, silver-haired, commanding, with the kind of presence that made people automatically step aside. She didn't recognize him, but from Adrian's reaction, this wasn't going to be a pleasant encounter. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. "Theodore Hawthorne, my former business partner, and Isabel's father." Riley felt Adrian's entire body tense beside her. This explained the hostile undercurrent she'd sensed. Family drama, mixed with business betrayal, the kind of toxic combination that destroyed relationships and reputations with equal efficiency. "Should we leave?" Riley asked, squeezing his hand. "No." Adrian's voice was firm, resolved. "I'm done running from the past." Besides, he looked down at her with something that looked like wonder. "I have something worth fighting for now." Theodore Hawthorne spotted them before they could retreat, his pale eyes fixing on their joined hands with obvious disapproval. He approached with the measured stride of a man who was used to commanding attention and getting his way. "Adrian," his voice was cool, formal. "I wasn't sure you'd have the nerve to show your face here tonight." "Theodore." Adrian's response was equally cold. "Still charming as ever, I see." The older man's gaze shifted to Riley, looking her up and down with the kind of assessment that made her feel like livestock at auction. "And you must be the latest distraction. Tell me, my dear, do you have any idea what kind of man you're involving yourself with?" Riley felt Adrian's hand tighten on hers, felt the barely contained anger radiating from him. This man was trying to humiliate them both, using her to wound Adrian in the most public way possible. But Riley Thompson hadn't built her career by backing down from bullies, even ones in expensive tuxedos. "I know exactly what kind of man Adrian is," she said, her voice steady and clear. "He's honorable, brilliant, and more generous than you could ever understand, and if you're trying to warn me away from him, you're about 3 years too late." Theodore's eyebrows rose slightly. 3 years? "That's how long I've been in love with him," Riley continued, the words spilling out with a truth that surprised even her. "So whatever petty grievances you're nursing, whatever damage you think you can do to his reputation, you're wasting your time. There's nothing you could say that would change how I feel about him." The silence that followed was deafening. Riley could feel Adrian staring at her, could sense the photographers who had drifted closer to catch what looked like developing drama. But all she could focus on was the truth she'd just spoken. She was in love with Adrian Sterling, had been for longer than she'd allowed herself to acknowledge. "Well," Theodore said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "How touching." He stalked away without another word, leaving Riley and Adrian standing in the middle of the ballroom, still holding hands, both breathing hard. "Riley," Adrian's voice was rough, uncertain. "What you just said, I meant it." She turned to face him fully, suddenly not caring who was watching or what cameras might be recording. 3 years, Adrian. 3 years of fighting this, of pretending I didn't feel more than I should. Adrian's free hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. "You really meant what you said? About being in love with me?" "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper, but it felt like the most important thing she'd ever said. "I love you, Adrian Sterling. I've been falling for you slowly, one late night, one shared glance, one moment at a time. And tonight, I can't pretend anymore." For a moment, Adrian looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Stunned, overwhelmed, completely undone. Then his face broke into a smile that transformed his entire being. "Thank God," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion, "because I've been halfway in love with you since that first Christmas party, when you laughed at James's terrible jokes. And tonight, watching you defend me, seeing you be everything I've always known you are." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I'm completely gone for you, Riley Thompson." And then he was kissing her again, right there in the middle of the Waldorf ballroom, in front of hundreds of people and a dozen cameras. But this kiss was different from the desperate hunger on the terrace. This was celebration, declaration, the sealing of something that felt inevitable and miraculous at the same time. When they broke apart, still holding each other, Riley realized that several couples had stopped dancing to watch them. Some were smiling, charmed by the obvious love between them. Others were murmuring behind champagne flutes, already crafting the gossip that would fuel society pages for weeks. "We should probably leave," Adrian murmured against her ear, "before I do something that really gives them something to talk about." Riley laughed, feeling giddy and reckless and completely alive. "Like what?" "Like carry you out of here over my shoulder because I can't wait another second to have you all to myself." The heat in his voice made Riley's knees weak. "That would definitely make the papers." "Worth it," Adrian said, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "You're worth any scandal, any headline, any consequence." As they made their way toward the exit, stopping to say polite goodbyes and deflect curious questions, Riley felt like she was walking through a dream. 6 hours ago, she'd been Adrian Sterling's assistant, carefully maintaining professional boundaries and denying feelings she was afraid to examine. Now she was walking out of the most exclusive gala in New York on the arm of the man she loved, who loved her back, who just declared that love in front of half of Manhattan's elite. The car was waiting for them outside, and Adrian helped her into the back seat with the same careful attention he'd shown all evening. But as they pulled away from the Waldorf, as the lights of the city blurred past the windows, the atmosphere between them shifted. The performance was over. The audience was gone. Now it was just Riley and Adrian, alone in the darkness, with nothing between them but the truth they'd finally spoken and the desire that had been building all night. "Your place or mine?" Adrian asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the space between them. Riley looked at him, this man who'd just changed her entire world with a kiss and a confession, and smiled. "Yours," she said. "I want to see where Adrian Sterling goes when he stops being perfect." His laugh was rough, intimate. "Careful what you wish for, sweetheart. The man behind the image might surprise you. I'm counting on it." As the car wound through the streets of Manhattan toward Adrian's penthouse, Riley realized that everything she'd thought she knew about her life, her future, her carefully drawn boundaries, had just been rewritten, and for the first time in her careful, controlled existence, she couldn't wait to see what came next. Adrian's penthouse was nothing like Riley had imagined. She'd expected something cold, modern, intimidating, the kind of space that screamed wealth and power but felt nothing like a home. Instead, she found herself in a warm, elegant sanctuary high above the city, all exposed brick and rich leather, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. "Surprised?" Adrian asked, shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket and draping it over a chair with casual grace. "Completely." Riley turned in a slow circle, taking in the space that felt both luxurious and lived in. "It's beautiful, warm. You sound like you expected a corporate boardroom with a bed in the corner." Riley laughed, suddenly nervous now that they were alone, away from the cameras and crowds. "Something like that." Adrian moved toward her slowly, deliberately, like he was approaching something precious that might flee if he moved too quickly. "Are you having second thoughts? Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Adrian reached up and began loosening his tie, his eyes never leaving hers. The simple gesture was somehow more intimate than anything that had happened between them all evening. "I've been thinking about this moment for longer than I care to admit," he said quietly, letting the silk tie slip through his fingers to pool on the floor. "But I need you to be sure, Riley, because once we cross this line, there's no going back." Riley felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she watched him roll up his sleeves, revealing the strong forearms she'd admired from across conference rooms for 3 years. This was Adrian, without the armor of formal business attire, still devastating but somehow more real, more accessible. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, relief, hunger, and something that looked like reverence all mixed together. He closed the distance between them until he was standing close enough to touch, close enough that she could smell his cologne, mixing with something uniquely him. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I used to watch you in meetings and wonder what you'd look like if you let your hair down, if you smiled at me the way you smiled at everyone else." "I couldn't," Riley admitted, leaning into his touch. "You made me too nervous, too aware of things I shouldn't be thinking about." "What kind of things?" Heat flooded Riley's cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Things like how your hands would feel on my skin, how your voice would sound when you said my name in the dark, how you'd taste when you kissed me." Adrian's breath hitched, and Riley could see the careful control he'd maintained all evening starting to crack. "And now you know. Now I know." She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the slight roughness of his jaw, the way his eyes fluttered closed at her touch. "And I want to know more." That was all the invitation Adrian needed. His lips found hers in a kiss that was different from the ones at the gala, softer, deeper, full of promise rather than desperation. Riley felt herself melting against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he kissed her, like he had all the time in the world. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I want to take my time with you," he whispered, his voice rough with restraint. "I want to worship every inch of you until you forget there was ever a time when we weren't like this." Riley's knees nearly gave out at the raw desire in his voice. "Adrian, but first," he continued, pressing a soft kiss to her temple, "I want to take care of you. You've been in those heels all night, and I can see you're exhausted." Riley blinked, surprised by the tender consideration in his voice. She had been expecting passion, intensity, the kind of overwhelming desire that had been building between them all evening, but this gentle care, this attention to her comfort, was somehow more intimate than any kiss. "What did you have in mind?" she asked softly. Adrian's smile was both innocent and devastating. "Trust me." Riley nodded and watched as Adrian knelt gracefully in front of her, his hands gentle as he lifted one foot. The sight of this powerful man on his knees before her, carefully removing her shoes with reverent attention, made Riley's chest tight with emotion. "Better?" he asked, looking up at her with those steel blue eyes that had haunted her dreams. "Much." Riley's voice came out breathier than she'd intended. Adrian stood slowly, his hands trailing up her legs in a way that made her shiver. "Champagne, water, something to eat?" "Adrian." Riley reached for him, needing to feel the solid warmth of him under her hands. "I don't need you to take care of me. I need—" "What?" His hands settled on her waist, thumbs tracing small circles that made her pulse race. "Tell me what you need." "I need you to stop treating me like I'm going to break. I need you to touch me like you want me. I need—" She took a shaky breath. "I need you to make me forget everything that isn't this moment." Adrian's eyes went dark, and Riley could see the careful control he'd been maintaining finally snap. His hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him until she could feel the hard length of his body, could feel how much he wanted her. "You have no idea what you do to me," he growled against her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "How many nights I've lain in bed thinking about you, wishing I could cross the lines I'd drawn between us." Riley's head fell back as Adrian's lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, pressing kisses that made her entire body come alive. "Show me," she whispered. Adrian pulled back to look at her, his hands coming up to touch her face with devastating gentleness. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." That was all the permission Adrian needed. His mouth crashed down on hers in a kiss that was all heat and hunger, and 3 years of suppressed desire. Riley kissed him back with matching intensity, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. When her fingers finally found the warm expanse of his chest, Adrian groaned against her lips, the sound vibrating through both of them. Riley had always known he was fit. The way his shirts fit across his shoulders was evidence enough, but feeling the solid strength of him under her palms was something else entirely. "Riley," he breathed against her mouth, and the way he said her name, like a prayer, like a promise, made her feel like the most powerful woman in the world. Adrian's hands found the zipper of her dress, and he paused, looking into her eyes for permission. Riley nodded and felt the silk whisper down her body to pool at her feet. Adrian's sharp intake of breath made her feel beautiful, desired, cherished. "You're perfect," he murmured, his hands tracing the curves of her body with reverent attention. "Absolutely perfect." Riley reached for him, needing more contact, more of him, but Adrian caught her hands gently. "Bedroom," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "I want to do this right." He swept her up in his arms before she could protest, carrying her through the penthouse toward what she assumed was his bedroom. Riley buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, marveling at how right this felt, how natural. The bedroom was as beautifully appointed as the rest of the apartment. Warm woods, rich fabrics, and those same massive windows that made the room feel like it was floating above the city. Adrian set her down gently beside the king-sized bed, his hands immediately finding her waist again, as if he couldn't bear not to be touching her. "Last chance," he said softly, though his eyes held a heat that suggested he might die if she changed her mind now. "Adrian Sterling," Riley said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Shut up and kiss me." His laugh was rough, delighted. "Yes, ma'am." And then there were no more words, no more hesitation, no more careful boundaries. There was only Adrian's mouth on hers, his hands mapping every curve of her body, the way he whispered her name like a litany as they fell onto the bed together. Outside, the city sparkled and hummed with life, but Riley was only aware of the man above her, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, the way he touched her like he was memorizing every inch of her skin. This was what she'd been afraid of, what she'd spent 3 years running from, not just the desire but the overwhelming tenderness, the way Adrian made her feel, not just wanted but cherished, not just desired but loved. As they moved together in the darkness, as Adrian showed her exactly what she meant to him with his hands and his mouth and his whispered confessions, Riley realized that all her careful boundaries, all her professional distance, had been nothing more than fear. Fear of wanting something this much, fear of needing someone this completely, fear of loving someone so deeply that losing them would destroy her. But as Adrian's arms closed around her, as he held her like she was the most precious thing in his world, Riley realized that some fears were worth facing, some risks were worth taking, some loves were worth everything. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across the rumpled sheets. Riley woke slowly, consciousness returning in waves. The first thing she noticed was warmth, not just from the sunlight, but from the solid presence beside her. The second thing was the unfamiliar luxury of Egyptian cotton against her skin. The third was the delicious ache in muscles that hadn't been used in far too long. Memory flooded back in a rush of sensation and emotion. The gala, the confessions, Adrian's hands on her skin, his voice whispering her name in the darkness, the way he'd looked at her like she was something miraculous. Riley turned carefully, not wanting to wake the man sleeping beside her, and felt her breath catch all over again. Adrian looked different in sleep, younger, more peaceful, the sharp edges of control softened by vulnerability. His dark hair was tousled, and there was a contentment in his face that she'd never seen during their 3 years of working together. She studied him in the morning light, marveling at how surreal this felt. 24 hours ago she'd been his assistant. Now she was lying naked in his bed, watching him sleep, feeling like her entire world had been rebuilt from the ground up. "You're thinking too loud," Adrian murmured without opening his eyes, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Heat flooded Riley's cheeks. "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." Adrian's eyes opened slowly, and the warmth in them when they focused on her made Riley's heart skip. "Plus I can practically hear the wheels turning in that beautiful brain of yours." "I'm not overthinking anything," Riley protested, then immediately contradicted herself. "Okay, maybe I'm overthinking everything. This is a lot to process." Adrian shifted closer, his hand finding her waist under the sheets. The simple touch sent sparks through Riley's nervous system, reminding her of everything they'd shared in the darkness. "Regrets?" he asked quietly, and Riley could hear the vulnerability beneath the casual question. "None," she said immediately, then laughed at how quickly the response had come. "That's what scares me. I should be panicking right now. I should be worried about how this changes everything between us, about what happens at work on Monday, about whether we're moving too fast." "But you're not?" Riley considered this, studying Adrian's face in the golden morning light. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but not of this, Not of us. I'm scared of how right this feels, like we were always supposed to end up here. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Relief, tenderness, and something that looked like wonder. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "I've been waiting for you to run," he said softly. "Ever since last night, I've been bracing myself for you to realize what a complication this is and bolt for the door. I'm not running anywhere." Riley covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. "Though, I have to ask, what exactly are we doing here, Adrian? Where do we go from here?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb continuing its gentle movement across her skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I want everything with you," he said. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to take you to dinner at places that aren't business meetings. I want to introduce you to my friends as my girlfriend, not my assistant. I want—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I want to build a life with you." Riley's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "That's a lot of want for someone who claimed he didn't do relationships." "I didn't. Before you." Adrian's eyes were completely serious now. "Riley, I've spent my entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of complication, but you changed everything. You made me want things I didn't think I was capable of wanting." Before Riley could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed from somewhere in the tangled pile of clothing on the floor. They both ignored it. "What about work?" Riley asked, voicing the practical concern that had been nagging at the edges of her consciousness. "What about the fact that you're my boss? Technically, I'm the CEO of the company," Adrian said with a small smile. "I think I can approve my own relationship." "Adrian, be serious. This could cause problems. Then I'll transfer you to another department. Or you can work directly for James, or—" Adrian's expression grew thoughtful. "You could consider that promotion I've been trying to talk you into for months." Riley blinked. "What promotion?" "Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Your own office, your own team, a salary that would make your current pay look like lunch money." Adrian's smile was soft, proud. "I've been waiting for the right time to offer it to you. You've been ready for months." "You never said anything." "Because I knew you'd think I was offering it for the wrong reasons. You're brilliant, Riley. You see connections other people miss. You solve problems before they become crises. You make everyone around you better at their jobs. The promotion has nothing to do with how I feel about you, and everything to do with what you deserve." Emotion clogged Riley's throat. In all her fantasies about what a relationship with Adrian might look like, she'd never imagined this. Him, seeing her professional worth so clearly, wanting to lift her up rather than complicate her career. "You really think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility?" "I think you've been doing that job unofficially for 2 years. Adrian leaned closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I think Sterling and Associates would be lucky to have you as an executive, and I think it's time the world saw what I've known all along, that you're extraordinary." Riley felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "How are you real?" "I ask myself the same question about you every day." Adrian's voice was soft, wondering, especially now, especially after last night. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. "You should probably check that," Riley said reluctantly. Adrian groaned, reaching over the side of the bed to fish his phone from his jacket pocket. His expression changed as he read the screen. "What is it?" Riley asked, noting the slight frown on his face. 17 missed calls from my publicist, and about 30 text messages." Adrian's frown deepened as he scrolled through them. "Apparently our performance last night was even more convincing than we thought." "What do you mean?" Adrian turned the phone toward her, and Riley felt her stomach drop. The screen showed a series of news headlines, all featuring photos from the gala. Sterling's secret romance revealed. Power couple of the year. Adrian Sterling and mystery woman set society ablaze. From assistant to heiress. The Cinderella story. Taking Manhattan by storm. Riley sat up abruptly, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Oh God, they figured out who I am." "Hey!" Adrian's voice was calm, reassuring. He set the phone aside and reached for her, pulling her back down beside him. "It's okay. We knew this was a possibility." "Is it though, okay?" Riley's mind was racing, thinking about her parents, her friends, the inevitable scrutiny that came with being linked to someone like Adrian Sterling. "My life is about to be dissected by strangers. People are going to dig into my background, my family, my college years, and they're going to find an extraordinary woman who graduated summa cum laude from Columbia, who's built an impressive career through her own merit, who comes from a loving family that raised her to be strong and independent. Adrian's hand found hers under the sheets. Let them look, Riley. They won't find anything you need to be ashamed of. Riley took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic that had spiked through her system. Adrian was right. She'd lived an honest life, made good choices, built her career on merit rather than connections. But still, the thought of that life becoming public entertainment was overwhelming. What if this damages your reputation? She asked quietly. What if people think you're, I don't know, slumming it with the help? Adrian's expression went very still, very dangerous. If anyone, and I mean anyone, suggests that you are anything less than the most remarkable woman I've ever had the privilege of knowing, they'll answer to me, personally. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Riley's chest warm. This was what she'd been afraid to hope for. Not just someone who wanted her, but someone who would defend her, support her, stand beside her against whatever came. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Adrian said, pressing a kiss to her temple. We get dressed, have breakfast, and decide how we want to handle this. Together. Together, Riley repeated, liking the sound of that word in this context. Together, Adrian confirmed. But first, his hand trailed down her side, making her shiver. I believe I owe you a proper good morning. Riley laughed despite her anxiety. Adrian Sterling, are you trying to distract me from a crisis with your charm and devastating good looks? Is it working? Riley looked at him, hair mussed from sleep, eyes warm with affection and heat, completely focused on her, like she was the most important thing in his world, and felt the panic recede. Maybe a little, she admitted. Good. Adrian's smile was soft, intimate. Because I have plans for this morning. Plans that don't involve checking phones or reading headlines or worrying about what other people think. What kind of plans? Adrian's answer was to kiss her, slow and sweet and full of promise, and as Riley melted into his arms, as she felt the rightness of this moment settle into her bones, she realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever scrutiny they'd face, whatever changes this would bring to their lives, she was ready for it. She was ready for anything, as long as they faced it together. The morning light painted everything golden. Riley stood in Adrian's kitchen, wearing one of his dress shirts that hung to mid-thigh, watching him make coffee with the kind of focused precision he brought to everything. Even this simple domestic task looked elegant when Adrian Sterling did it. The way he measured the grounds, the careful attention to water temperature, the unconscious grace in every movement. Her phone had been buzzing quietly on the counter since dawn. Messages from friends, missed calls from her mother, and yes, some media attention from Friday night's photos. But Riley found she didn't care about any of that right now. She'd learned to manage the attention professionally, the way Adrian had taught her. A simple no comment and a polite smile went a long way. All that mattered was this moment, this man, this feeling of being exactly where she belonged. You're thinking too loud again, Adrian said without looking up from the coffee maker, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Just processing, Riley admitted. Last night feels like a beautiful dream. It was real. Adrian's eyes found hers, and the warmth in them made her heart skip. Every moment, every word, every feeling. Real. Riley felt breathless under the intensity of his gaze. 3 years of careful professionalism had done nothing to prepare her for the way Adrian looked at her now, like she was something precious, something miraculous. Adrian set down the coffee scoop and moved toward her, his steps deliberate, purposeful. When he reached her, his hands settled on her waist, thumbs tracing small circles that made her pulse race. I've never had a woman in this kitchen before, he admitted, his voice rough with honesty. I never wanted to wake up next to someone until you, and I know there's going to be attention because of last night, people asking questions, making assumptions. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, but I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that you're here. Riley's breath caught, the raw vulnerability in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she held his entire future in her hands, made her chest tight with emotion. Adrian, she whispered, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. I know it changes things, he continued, leaning into her touch. I know people will talk, that there might be complications we haven't thought of. Riley silenced him with a kiss, soft and sweet, and full of everything she couldn't put into words. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. Do you want to know what I'm thinking? She asked. Everything. Always. I'm thinking that I don't care what anyone else thinks or says. I'm thinking that last night felt like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been looking for. Riley's voice was steady, sure. And I'm thinking that whatever attention comes from being with you, it's a small price to pay for this. Adrian's smile was soft, wondering. You're not worried about the scrutiny? Of course I am. But I'm more worried about losing this. Riley's hands slipped to the nape of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. I'm choosing this, Adrian. I'm choosing us. Even though it means your life will change, even though people will want to know everything about you. Riley thought about the missed calls, the inevitable questions, the way their relationship would become public knowledge. But then she looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful CEO but the man who'd held her like she was precious, who'd made love to her with reverent tenderness, who was brave enough to admit he was scared. Let them look, she said simply. I know who I am, I know what this is, and I know what I want. What do you want, Riley Thompson? You. The word came out like a prayer, like a promise. All of you. The man behind the headlines, the one who makes me coffee exactly how I like it, who trusts me with the important things. You are the important thing. Adrian's voice was fierce, certain. You're the most important thing. Before Riley could respond, the coffee maker beeped, breaking the spell. Adrian laughed, the sound rich and warm, and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. Breakfast? He asked. And then we can figure out how to handle everything else together. I'd like that. They moved around the kitchen with surprising ease, Adrian cooking while Riley found plates and silverware. There was something deeply intimate about the domestic rhythm they fell into, the way Adrian would brush past her to reach something, the way Riley would lean into him as she set the table. As they sat down to eat, Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. Natalia Clark, my publicist, he said, probably wondering what kind of statement to prepare. Do we need a statement? Adrian considered this, reaching across the table to take her hand. What do you want to say to the world, Riley Thompson? Riley thought about it, about the photos that were probably already circulating, about the speculation and questions that would follow. Then she looked at Adrian, this man who just turned her world upside down in the most beautiful way, and smiled. That I'm exactly where I want to be, she said simply, with exactly who I want to be with. Then that's what we'll tell them. Adrian brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. Simple, honest, and completely ours. They finished breakfast in comfortable intimacy, occasionally interrupted by buzzing phones that they both chose to ignore. There would be time for dealing with the outside world later. Right now, all that mattered was this: coffee and conversation, quiet laughter and gentle touches, the feeling of being completely understood. What happens now? Riley asked eventually, voicing the question that had been humming beneath the surface all morning. Now we face whatever comes next together, Adrian said, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. We handle work professionally. We deal with any attention maturely, and we see where this beautiful thing between us takes us. And the promotion you mentioned is yours if you want it. Has nothing to do with this. Adrian gestured between them. You've earned it 10 times over, Riley. I want it, Riley said without hesitation. Good. Adrian's smile was proud, warm. Monday, we'll make it official, and we'll let HR know about us too, everything above board. People are going to talk. Let them. Adrian shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. What we have is real. That's all that matters. Riley looked at him. This man who'd turned her carefully ordered world upside down with a fake date that had become the most real thing in her life, and felt something settle into place in her chest. No second thoughts, she said firmly. None, Adrian agreed. Just excitement for whatever comes next. They sat there in the golden morning light, hands linked across the breakfast table, both knowing that they were about to embark on something that would change everything. The world outside would have questions, opinions, judgments, but here in this moment, there was only love, and that was more than enough. I love you, Adrian Sterling. I love you too, Riley Thompson. All of it. The attention, the complications, the beautiful unknown future. I love all of it because it comes with you. Riley smiled, feeling ready for anything as long as she faced it with him. Ready for love, for partnership, for whatever came next. Ready for everything. 6 months later, everything had changed and nothing had changed at all. Riley stood in her new corner office, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, the nameplate read, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility. The view was spectacular. The responsibility was everything she'd dreamed of, and the team she now led respected her completely. But what made her heart race wasn't the success or the recognition. It was the man walking toward her office, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and a smile that still made her forget her own name. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," Adrian said formally as he entered, though the heat in his eyes was anything but professional. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Riley replied, accepting the coffee he offered. "Thank you for the coffee. You know you don't have to bring me coffee anymore, right? I'm an executive now." "Old habits," Adrian said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that made her pulse race. "Besides, I like taking care of you." Riley felt her cheeks warm. Even after 3 weeks of stolen moments between meetings, late dinners at his penthouse, and mornings that began with his arms around her, she still felt that flutter of excitement every time he looked at her like that. "Even after 3 weeks," she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction, "especially after 6 months." Adrian moved closer, until he was standing just inside her personal space, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. "Are you telling me to stop?" Riley looked toward her open door, then back at Adrian. "Maybe close the door first?" Adrian's smile was slow, devastating. He moved to close the door, then returned to her, his hands settling on her waist like they belonged there. "Better?" he asked. "Much." Riley set down her coffee and reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become second nature over the past weeks. "How's your morning?" "Better now." Adrian's hands tightened on her waist. "I had a very interesting conversation with Harrison Whitfield this morning." Riley looked up at him, noting something different in his expression. "The man from the gala. What about?" "He wants to invest in Sterling and Associates. A significant investment that would allow us to expand internationally." Adrian's voice was casual, but Riley could see the excitement he was trying to contain. He was very complimentary about the company's leadership, both present and future. Future leadership? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing small circles on her waist through the silk of her blouse. "Riley, there's something I need to ask you." Something in his tone made Riley's heart skip. "What?" Instead of answering, Adrian stepped back and reached into his jacket pocket. Riley's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Adrian," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know some people might say 6 months isn't long enough," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I've been thinking about this every day since the gala, since the moment you said yes to helping me, to taking that risk, to crossing those lines with me. These 6 months have shown me what forever could look like." Riley felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Adrian, I love you, Riley Thompson." Adrian's voice was steady, certain. "I love your strength, your intelligence, the way you challenge me to be better. I love the way you make coffee taste better in the morning, the way you fit perfectly against my chest when we sleep, the way you believe in things that matter." He opened the box, revealing a ring that took Riley's breath away, a perfect solitaire diamond that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across her office walls. "I love the way you've changed my life without even trying," Adrian continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I want to spend the rest of my life earning the right to love you. Riley Thompson, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and perfect. Riley stared at the ring, at Adrian's face, at this moment that felt both completely surreal and absolutely inevitable. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes, of course yes." Adrian's smile was brilliant, transformative. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady, and Riley marveled at how perfectly it fit, how right it looked there. "I love you," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "I love you so much, Adrian Sterling." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around in the space between her desk and the window, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, they were both breathing hard, both grinning like teenagers. "We're engaged," Riley said, as if testing the words. "We're engaged," Adrian confirmed, pressing his forehead against hers. "Are you ready to be Mrs. Sterling?" "I've been ready since that first morning I woke up in your arms," Riley admitted. 6 months ago I thought I was just helping you with a fake date. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Adrian's kiss was soft, sweet, full of promise. When they broke apart, Riley became aware of applause coming from outside her office. They both turned to see their colleagues watching through the glass walls, grinning and clapping. "I think our secret is out," Riley said, laughing despite her embarrassment. "Good." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "I want everyone to know that you're mine. that I'm yours, that we're building something beautiful together. James Fletcher appeared in the doorway, beaming like a proud father. "Well, it's about time," he said. "Should I start planning the engagement party?" "Give us 5 minutes to process this ourselves first," Adrian said, but his tone was warm, affectionate. After James left, with strict instructions to keep everyone else at bay for a while, Riley and Adrian found themselves alone again in her office, still holding each other, still marveling at what had just happened. "I can't believe you proposed in my office," Riley said, admiring the ring on her finger. "Where else would I propose to the woman who's been the heart of this company for 3 years? Adrian's voice was soft, wondering. "This is where it all started, Riley. Where I first saw you, where I fell in love with your mind, before I ever had the courage to admit I was falling for all of you." Riley felt tears spill over at the tenderness in his voice. "You know what this means, right? No more pretending, no more careful boundaries. We're really doing this. We're really doing this." Adrian wiped the tears from her cheeks with gentle thumbs. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Riley admitted. "But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means something amazing is about to happen." "What do you think will happen? When we tell people, when it becomes real?" Riley considered this, thinking about her family, her friends, the life they were about to build together. "I think people are going to be happy for us. I think they're going to see what I see, that we make each other better, that what we have is real and rare and worth celebrating. And if they don't, then that's their loss." Riley's voice was strong, confident. "I know what this is, Adrian. I know what you are, and I know what we're going to build together." Adrian's smile was soft, proud. "What are we going to build?" "Everything." Riley stood on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of dreams. "A marriage, a partnership, a life that's bigger and more beautiful than anything either of us could create alone." "A family?" Adrian asked quietly, hopefully. "Someday." Riley's smile was radiant. "Little Sterlings with your eyes and my stubborn streak. God help us all," Adrian said with a laugh. They stood there in her office, engaged and in love and completely lost in each other, while outside the windows of Sterling and Associates, Manhattan hummed with life and possibility. "I should probably get back to work," Riley said eventually, though she made no move to step out of Adrian's arms. "Probably." Adrian's hands traced up her back, making her shiver. "Important meeting with the Tokyo investors in an hour. Very important." Riley's fingers played with his collar, smoothing the silk of his tie. "Can't keep them waiting." "Definitely not." Neither of them moved. "Although," Adrian said thoughtfully, "as CEO I could always reschedule that meeting." "Adrian Sterling, are you suggesting we play hooky on the day we got engaged?" "I'm suggesting we celebrate properly. Champagne lunch, that little place you love in Brooklyn. Maybe a walk through Central Park where we can plan our future." Riley's heart melted at the romantic simplicity of it. "That sounds perfect." "Good." Adrian pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "Because I want to hear every dream you have for our life together. I want to plan our wedding, our honeymoon, our happily ever after." "Happily ever after," Riley repeated, loving the sound of it. "I like that." "Me too." Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. "I used to think that was just something that happened in fairy tales, but then you walked into my life and made me believe in magic again." Riley felt her chest tight with love for this man who'd given her everything: love, partnership, a future bright with possibility. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "We never finished our fake date. Technically, you hired me to be your girlfriend for one night, and here we are, 3 weeks later, engaged." Adrian's laugh was rich, delighted. "I guess I got more than I bargained for." "Much more." Riley smiled up at him. This man who'd become her everything. Was it worth it? The complication, the risk, the complete upheaval of everything you thought you wanted. Riley Thompson, soon to be Riley Sterling. Adrian's voice was soft, certain, full of love. "You are the best decision I've ever made, the best risk I've ever taken, the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even though I'm going to spend the rest of our lives challenging you, arguing with you in boardrooms, and generally being a complete handful, especially because of that." Adrian's smile was soft, wondering. "I can't wait to spend forever being challenged by you, surprised by you, completely overwhelmed by how much I love you." As they finally broke apart to face the day and the future that stretched ahead of them, Riley caught their reflection in her office window. They looked different now, transformed by love and promise and the beautiful certainty of a shared tomorrow. 3 weeks ago, she'd agreed to pretend to be Adrian Sterling's girlfriend for one night. Now she was going to be his wife for the rest of their lives. And as Adrian's hand found hers, as their fingers intertwined with the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd found their home in each other. Riley realized that sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the simplest word, yes. 3 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their Westchester home, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floors where toys lay scattered like colorful confetti. Riley Sterling, she still felt a thrill every time she thought her married name, stood in the kitchen making coffee, watching her husband chase their 18-month-old daughter around the living room. "Daddy," Sophie giggled, her limited vocabulary expressing pure joy as she ran on unsteady legs toward the safety of her mother's arms. "I don't know about that, Princess," Adrian called out, his hair mussed and his expensive shirt wrinkled from playing on the floor. At 41, he was more handsome than ever, the sharp edges of his younger self softened by love and fatherhood into something warm and approachable. Riley scooped Sophie into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. Sophie had Adrian's steel blue eyes and Riley's stubborn chin, and she'd wrapped both her parents completely around her tiny finger from the moment she'd entered the world. "Mama," Sophie babbled happily, hiding her face against Riley's neck. "I'll always save you, baby girl," Riley murmured, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Adrian approached them both, his expression soft with the kind of contentment Riley had never imagined possible during those careful early years. He wrapped his arms around both his girls, creating a warm circle of family. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," he said, pressing a soft kiss to Riley's temple. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." Riley smiled up at him, still feeling that familiar flutter in her chest. "Sleep well?" "Until someone decided to have nightmares about monsters under the bed," Adrian said, ruffling Sophie's curls. "Required extensive daddy monster hunting at 3 a.m. Riley laughed. "Find any?" "Defeated them all with tickle attacks," Adrian said seriously, making Sophie giggle. "Our daughter is officially monster-free." "My hero," Riley said, and meant it. They moved through their morning routine with the easy rhythm of a family that had found its groove. Adrian helped Sophie with breakfast, while Riley packed his briefcase and Sophie's daycare bag. The domesticity of it still amazed Riley, how naturally they'd fallen into this life together, how perfectly the pieces had fit. Sterling and Associates had thrived under their joint leadership. Riley had proven herself a formidable executive, leading the company's expansion into sustainable development, while Adrian focused on international markets. They made an incredible team, both in business and in life. "I have the consortium meeting this afternoon," Adrian mentioned as he wiped syrup from Sophie's face. "Should be home by 6. "Sophie and I are having lunch with my mother," Riley said, smiling at the memory of how thoroughly her mother had fallen in love with Adrian. "She's teaching Sophie to say please and thank you." "Nana!" Sophie clapped her sticky hands together at the mention of her grandmother. "Cookie!" "Of course, Princess," Riley said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "We can't let Daddy go without his girls for too long." Adrian's phone buzzed, and Riley saw him glance at it with the automatic response of a busy executive. But then he set it aside without reading the message, giving his full attention back to his family. "Work can wait," he said simply, catching Riley's surprised look. "This is more important." Riley felt her heart swell with love for this man, who'd learned to balance ambition with what truly mattered. The Adrian Sterling she'd first worked for would have answered that phone call immediately. The Adrian Sterling she'd married had learned that some things were more precious than any business deal. After dropping Sophie at daycare, a process that involved extensive hugs and promises to be back soon, Riley and Adrian rode into the city together, sharing comfortable silence in the back of their car. "Penny for your thoughts," Adrian said, taking her hand in his. Riley looked down at their joined hands, at the wedding ring that complemented her engagement ring, at the evidence of this life they'd built together. "Just thinking about how surreal this is sometimes. How different everything is from what I thought my life would look like. Better or worse? So much better." Riley squeezed his hand. "I used to think I knew what I wanted. Career success, financial security, maybe someday finding someone who wouldn't mind that I was ambitious and difficult." "You're not difficult," Adrian protested. "You're passionate. There's a difference. And instead, I found someone who loves me because I'm ambitious and passionate. Someone who pushes me to dream bigger, reach higher, be more than I ever imagined possible." Adrian brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "You did the same for me. You taught me what it meant to have a real partner, Someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be worthy of her love. Riley felt tears prick at her eyes. Even after 5 years of marriage, Adrian could still undo her with his tenderness. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Really, truly happy?" "Riley Sterling," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion, "I wake up every morning grateful that you said yes to a ridiculous fake date proposal 4 years ago. I'm grateful for our daughter, our home, our business, our future. But mostly I'm grateful for you." Riley thought about that young woman who'd stood in Adrian's office 4 years ago, terrified of wanting something she thought was impossible. That woman could never have imagined this life, the love, the family, the partnership that went deeper than marriage or business, or anything she'd ever dreamed of. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The gala. Every day." Adrian's smile was soft, wondering. "Best fake date in history. It stopped being fake pretty quickly. The moment I saw you in that red dress, it was real," Adrian admitted. "I just didn't have the courage to admit it yet." They arrived at their building, the same building where they'd worked together for 3 years before finding the courage to love each other. Riley still felt a thrill walking through those familiar halls, especially with Adrian's hand in hers. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah from accounting called out as they passed. "How's our Sophie?" "Growing too fast," Riley called back. "She's already trying to say everyone's names around the office." "Future CEO in training," Sarah laughed. Riley and Adrian exchanged a look of shared amusement. Sophie would grow up knowing she could be anything, do anything, dream as big as she wanted. They'd make sure of that. At the elevator, Adrian pulled Riley aside, backing her gently against the wall with the same intensity that had made her heart race 5 years ago. "What are you doing?" Riley laughed. "Kissing my wife before we have to be professional executives for the next 8 hours, Adrian said, leaning down to capture her lips in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both breathing slightly harder, Riley shook her head in amazement. "3 years of marriage and you still make me feel like a teenager," she said. "Good." Adrian's smile was devastating. "I plan to keep making you feel that way for the next 50 years. 50 years, huh?" "At minimum." Adrian pressed one more soft kiss to her lips. "I love you, Riley Sterling. I love you too." As the elevator doors opened and they stepped inside, ready to face another day of meetings and decisions, and the complex dance of running a business together, Riley caught their reflection in the polished doors. They looked like what they were, partners in every sense of the word, 2 people who'd found their home in each other. The elevator rose toward their offices, toward another day and the life they'd built together, and Riley felt that familiar flutter of gratitude for the beautiful complexity of loving Adrian Sterling. 4 years ago, she'd said yes to pretending to be his girlfriend for one night. Tonight she'd go home to their house, their daughter, their life, and fall asleep in the arms of the man who'd become her everything. Some yeses, Riley thought, as the elevator carried them toward their future, changed everything forever, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the beautiful life that had grown from one brave word spoken in trust and hope and the beginning of love. The end. If you were in Riley's position, would you have taken the same leap of faith? What moment in their love story touched your heart the most? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.